Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to The Print. My name is Fatima and I have with me today Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament, Senior Congress Leader, and also the Chairperson of Parliamentary Standing Committee on Information Technology. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Pleasure to be with you, Fatima.
Now, there is one news that has dominated the news cycle completely for the last week, and that is the story of Pegasus, an Israeli spyware that was reportedly used to hack over several dozens of activists, journalists, and politicians, including Congress leader Rahul Gandhi. As the chairperson of the IT Standing Committee, I want to ask you, how concerning an issue is this?
I'm sorry to say it's extremely serious because, what is the worst fear? The implication is that the government has been snooping on its own citizens, including many going about their lawful business. We're supposed to be, after all, a democracy where the rule of law prevails. And while no one would object to the government intercepting communications lawfully to track terrorists or prevent crimes, private citizens, including opposition politicians, enjoy a fundamental right to privacy, as affirmed by the Supreme Court in the Puttaswamy judgment. And for the ruling party to use Pegasus to obtain information on its political opponents, as the targeting of Rahul Gandhi or Prashant Kishore would suggest, would not just be unethical, but a misuse of taxpayers' money for partisan political purposes. And worse, it would be illegal because we have a very clear legal structure that authorizes some very specific kinds of interception under the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885 and the Information Technology Act of 2000, both of which allow for the interception of communications, telephone, electronic data in the interests of the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, or for preventing incitement to a crime, the commission of an offense under the law. Now, and there are guidelines by the Supreme Court on how this has got to be done, right? That you've got to have a committee with the Home Secretary, either at the center or the states. Then within a week, this has to be sent to a review committee chaired by the cabinet secretary. Interception may be permitted for 2 months, can be renewed, but not beyond 6 months. All this is under the law. So we have to ask the government, when the government says no unauthorized surveillance has taken place, did authorized surveillance take place? If so, then under what provisions of law? Because the law clearly does not apply to the kinds of people whose names have come out in the public domain as the targets of Pegasus hacking. Prashant Kishore's phone was forensically analyzed, and it's confirmed that his phone was hacked as recently as this month. So continuously, and including as recently as this month. And hacking is specifically a crime, a criminal offense under the IT Act, Section 43 and 66, which says that an unauthorized access to a computer device, computer resource, computer network can attract imprisonment for up to 3 years or a fine of 5 lakh rupees or both. So actually, it's not only wrong, there's even a punishment prescribed for the crime. So taking control of devices or hacking them through spyware or malware is clearly a gross illegality. And frankly, the problem is, and the reason it's so serious, is that surveillance using a spyware tool like Pegasus is illegal unless those who've done it can demonstrate otherwise. I mean, if they can say, oh, we thought Prashant Kishore was a secret agent of China and we did it for national security, if that's the allegation, they better say so. Because without demonstrating that, this is an incredibly serious illegality. And I have to tell you very seriously, it is also a threat to Indian democracy.
Sure.
After all, this list is infinitely expandable. All they have to do is pay for more people to snoop on.
Right. Dr. Tharoor, you'll recall that back in October 2019, a similar story surfaced that Pegasus was used to to spy the Bhima Koregaon activist who was subsequently arrested. Now, as the IT committee head, what do you think that can be reasonably done by the committee? And is there something that can be done to push the government to take the adequate measures?
So the committee will do its job, I'm sure. I mean, we have a meeting on the topic of citizens' data privacy and security, which is a long-running topic. It's been going on for a couple of years, in which we've been having a series of different meetings on various aspects of this. And I'm sure that questions on Pegasus are bound to come up when this committee discusses these issues with the officials of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, the Home Affairs Ministry, and the Telecoms Ministry. But having said all of that, there is absolutely no doubt that the committee has limitations. I mean, I don't want to pretend otherwise. We're not like the committee, say, of the US Congress, which has certain standing and rights, including the right to subpoena witnesses and to exact sort of, they are like a court of law, which we are not. And that's one of the reasons, or in fact, the principal reason why I too, as chairman of the IT committee, have said, while we do what we can only question, as I say, secretaries to government. There are limits to how far we can go. A court monitored, ideally a Supreme Court monitored judicial inquiry will be far better to establish exactly what has happened and to come to the point of establishing whether any crime has been committed by those who misused it. If the government says they have not done so, then some foreign agency has done this. That becomes an equally grave matter as a threat to national security.
One of the names who've been reported to have been hacked, their phone numbers hacked, is the woman who accused former CJI Ranjan Gogoi of sexual harassment. Ranjan Gogoi is now a member of the Rajya Sabha. Do you think if there is to be a Supreme Court monitored probe into this matter, it will complicate the court's position and force itself to ask some uncomfortable questions, look inwards and ask some questions of the people who have headed it in the past?
It's a very good question. First of all, the names on the list and the example you gave is a very good one, are precisely why it's difficult to imagine that it's a foreign country doing this, because it's difficult to see what interest a foreign country would have in this poor lady and her family and friends, or indeed in many of the others whose names have been targeted. Whereas you can very well see why the ruling party might have an interest in them. So that's one observation from your question. But on the larger question of whether the Supreme Court is a problem, the short answer is it just depends on the Supreme Court itself. The population of judges keeps changing with retirements. So many of the judges who directly served with Justice Gogoi are not going to be on the court for much longer, and many have already retired, as indeed he has. So one could argue that one can always trust the integrity of the court to do this. And if it so happens that the court appoints a judge to look into this matter who feels compromised because of the issue you raise, that judge can always recuse themselves. So it's not as if that you are locked into a situation where the court is bound to somehow feel compromised on this. I think that the court is a big enough institution that it should be able to deal with this matter without feeling somehow that it's not able to rise to the occasion because a former Chief Justice was involved. There's also the Commissions of Inquiry Act, and there's also one more development today, Fatima, which is the announcement by the West Bengal government of the establishment of a statutory commission of inquiry headed by a retired Supreme Court judge, Madan Lokur, to look into this very same question, because some crimes were committed on Bengal soil. That is that, when Prashant Kishore was campaigning, I think Abhishek Banerjee, the nephew of Mamata Banerjee, was also one of the people whose phone was hacked by Pegasus. So there are enough grounds for Bengal to say that they have the right to create an inquiry commission. And certainly a person as eminent as former Supreme Court Justice Madan Lokur would have certain rights. Now, of course, it'll be interesting to see the extent to which the government of India collaborates or cooperates with this inquiry, but the judicial process has already been initiated with this decision.
Sure. Now, NSO, which owns Pegasus, has reacted to this whole controversy in India, and they've told ANI news agency that, and I quote, "We only sell to governments, and that too to law enforcement and intelligence organizations of the government. Due diligence is done. We subscribe to all UN guiding principles before and after selling." And subsequently, Shale Julio, who's the NSO's CEO and co-founder, told the Washington Post that every allegation is concerning and will be investigated. My question then to you is this: do you think that Pegasus, a spyware one would imagine, is built to try and track terrorists or criminals? Do you think in a country like India, many countries, but especially in India, where increasingly the term anti-national is being used all too freely, do you think Pegasus is only bound to be misused?
Well, there's a real risk of that. I mean, the fact is that you can't really put the genie back in the bottle. These things cannot be uninvented. There are people working. In fact, there's another company in Israel called Kandiru, which apparently also has an even more expensive software that does similar or perhaps worse things to people's phones. So there's already this kind of technology being developed. And of course, Israel has classified this technology as a military weapon. And that's why the Israeli government has to consent. Why the government has to consent for its deployment. Now, having said this, if the Indian government is confirmed to have purchased Pegasus, it is a fair question to ask them point blank, have you used it on any domestic suspects who are not classified as terrorists and criminals? Because, the truth of the matter is that there is no legal basis for doing this otherwise. No one in India would really challenge the government's right to have snooping software available at a time when it faces very major threats from neighboring countries, including very powerful nuclear countries. But to use that software internally against its political opponents or to gain information for its political advantage is a gross misuse of taxpayers' money, and surely would be found, would fall afoul of our country's laws. That to me is the key issue. As far as Israel is concerned, this Mr. Julio has also said, Fatima, that he will collaborate with any government inquiry. So if the government says our Supreme Court is inquiring, please collaborate with them, NSO will do so. The question is, will our government say that?
Right. Now, the IT Minister, Ashwini Vaishnaw, he stood in the parliament last week and categorically denied these allegations. And he said that this seems to be an anti-India conspiracy of sorts. And ironically, minutes later, his name was himself found in the list of those whose phones have been hacked. But then Ravi Shankar Prasad, former IT Minister, he said that, this is clearly a wrongdoing and that several countries, as many as 45 countries, have been known to use Pegasus. So why are people targeting India? What do you make?
That itself gives away something, doesn't it? I mean, that seems to imply that India is one of the 45. First of all, I'm not sure that 45 is a correct number, but even if it is, there you are. Now, I saw the statement. Obviously, I was in the House. The fact is that the way in which these things work, you have a debate in Parliament, you have a thorough discussion. The Home Minister should attend because it's a national security matter. And at the end of all the questions, comments you've heard, then you reply. You don't issue a statement and shoot and scoot. That's not what Parliament is for. Parliament is not a notice board. And I do want to stress that as far as we are concerned, we ought to have a great deal of understanding and respect for the government. That's normal. That's the way it is. But the government statement actually doesn't say, it falls short of a genuine, complete denial. So it says, for example, Government of India's response to an RTI application has been prominently reported by media and is in itself sufficient to counter any malicious claims. Except that the RTI reply actually doesn't counter the malicious claims or the non-malicious claims. It simply says, we have no information about Pegasus. Now, that, I must say, is very difficult to justify given the new revelations that have come. Secondly, there is a statement in the statement by Mr. Vaishnaw, there's a sentence, those reports also had no factual basis and were categorically denied by all parties. The use of Pegasus has not been categorically denied by the Indian state. They've never said they're not using Pegasus. I would like to see any statement that says they're not using Pegasus. And WhatsApp, which was in 2019, the example you mentioned, was the agency, the app that was allegedly exploited by Pegasus. They use WhatsApp's vulnerabilities to reach people's phones. They've actually filed a suit in California against the NSO group for what they have done against their system. So that doesn't really work. Now, it is true, one sentence is absolutely correct. The report itself clarifies that the presence of a number on the list does not amount to snooping, he says, and that's true. No one has pretended that every single number is provably a victim of snooping, but the level of correlation when they actually check 67 phones, and in India, I think it was 30, and 10 of them have been visibly, by a forensic analysis, proven to have the Pegasus virus in it. That's a pretty high degree of correlation, and that's therefore sufficiently serious. Now, no one can examine all 300 or whatever phones, however many there were in India, Let me stress also that it's got to be a voluntary process. And for example, I believe the lady and her family in the Gogoi case refused to have their phones forensically analyzed. And I might add that one or two people, Rahul Gandhi, for example, said he had already given up that phone instrument, doesn't know where it is now, and therefore it cannot be analyzed. So it depends very much, all of this. Now, the fact is that that an analysis of a small cross-section of numbers did confirm hacking or hacking attempts. The timing of this hacking closely matched with the inclusion of the numbers on the list, and that gives the list a certain amount of credibility. Then, if Indian citizens had indeed been spied on by NSO's malware, that's pretty alarming news, right? The minister has not acknowledged this at all. CERT-In, which is the National Cybersecurity Agency, published a vulnerability report about Pegasus in 2019, saying that Indians can be vulnerable to the use of this. Okay. Now, at no stage does the minister's statement say that the Indian government or its agencies have not used Pegasus. Instead, he points to a statement from the NSO group claiming that the list of countries is incorrect. Now, you tell me, why should Indian citizens rely on the word of an Israeli company instead of our government itself coming out and saying, this is the fact, we haven't done it, we haven't bought it, we haven't spent any taxpayers' money on it? Right. I'm very confused about whether the answer of the minister answers anything. But in any case, it wasn't an answer, strictly speaking, because the questions weren't asked. It was just quickly off the bat a reaction to the media reports. And I honestly don't think that that's entirely enough to hold up in a court of law.
Sure. Finally, Dr. Tharoor, my final question to you is this. Now, at the core of this entire controversy lies the issue of privacy and a breach of privacy. Now, as concerning a matter as that is, I want to ask you in all honesty, do you think it is an issue that will stick with the masses at large? And I'm asking that because there have been these arguments made in the past that Indians at large do not care about privacy or do not understand it at least, not enough to make it an electoral issue. And I'm asking you that as a leader of Congress party or the opposition party right now, do you think it could just be reduced to an issue of, okay, a bunch of elites using an expensive software to track another bunch of elites? How do you make sure that the message of the sheer danger of it is sent across?
It's not easy. And I would agree with you that perhaps the vast majority of the Indian public has not fully understood the gravity of the fact that the government has used Pegasus against its own citizens, against its own people. And if that is proven, I want to clarify that we have not established that it was our government. All we know is that Pegasus has been used against people of India. Now, the question is, can we go out in our campaigns and explain this to the public when the public is more concerned about surviving COVID or losing jobs or the price of petrol and fuel, all of which we are, of course, raising separately? Will this be able to stick? I don't know. I mean, I must admit that Rahul Gandhi's efforts in the 2019 election to raise the controversies around Rafale never quite made the kind of traction with the public because it was not a daily bread and butter thing that affected their daily lives. And that's precisely what your question asks. I don't want to say that we have a simple answer. I know that those of us who understand what's at stake are very, very concerned and think it's an extremely serious issue. Can we share this understanding effectively with the general public, which have perhaps more existential concerns? That remains to be seen. I don't want to be glib about it and say, yeah, it's so important, everyone will see it, because I accept your question is well-based, is well-founded, that not everyone is going to give this the same amount of importance. Nonetheless, we have a duty as members of parliament to be conscious about the grave dangers to our country, to our state, to our constitution, to our democracy. And the fact is that if Mr. Prasad is right and many, many countries are using Pegasus, why is only India being targeted? Because India is proud of its democracy. India is a democracy that wants to be seen in the world as a democracy. And sadly, it has not, in fact, lived up to the highest democratic standards, either in using Pegasus, if it has done so, or in responding constructively to the opposition's demands for an investigation, if its own hands are clean in the matter. So these are the questions that continue to trouble people like me.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you, Fatima. Take care.
Okay, take care.